In 1811, Napoleon controls Europe, from the Mediterranean to the Niemen River. He's counting on Russian support to fight the British. But Alexander doesn't approve of Napoleon's expansionist strategy, and irrespective of their treaties, allows the British access to his ports. For Napoleon, Russia's behavior makes it an enemy of France. Caulaincourt, his closest advisor, tries to convince him not to embark on another devastating campaign, but Napoleon will hear nothing of it. In June 1812, the Grande Armée crosses the Niemen River and enters Russian territory in a declaration of war. Napoleon's aim is a lightning campaign. Alexander chooses to avoid conflict and allows the Grande Armée to invade his land. General Kutuzov is named as supreme commander of the Russian army. The French continue their march on Moscow in the intense heat, but the Russians strip the land bare as part of a scorched earth policy. Ill health and desertions decimate the Grande Armée. Despite his victory at the Battle of Borodino, also called the Battle of La Moskova, Napoleon cannot annihilate his enemy. The Grande Armée arrives in a deserted Moscow. The city's governor, Count Rostopchin, has decided to burn it down to leave nothing to the French.
Get down!
The Russians are ready to do anything to destroy the Grande Armée.
The artillery is in place, the cavalry too.
Lariboisiere tells me the stables are burning and the fire may spread to the arsenal.
400 crates of gunpowder? The slightest spark could blow the lot.
We don't have a moment to lose. We have to leave the Kremlin.
I am the first sovereign for more than 2 centuries to have conquered this fortress. There is no question.
This isn't about retreating, it's about keeping you safe.
The fire spreads, and it's impossible to predict where or when it'll stop. But Napoleon wants to prove his determination to the Tsar.
Savages. Burning their city like this. This is not how a war is fought!
The results of the fire in Moscow were impressive. More than 60% of the wooden constructions in the city burned down.
For 6 days, the flames are fanned by the wind and destroy the university library, palace, and theaters. They reduce countless wooden constructions to ashes: houses, warehouses, shops, and churches. The governor of Moscow, Count Rostopchin, writes to his wife, "By the time you receive this letter, Moscow will be reduced to ashes. Forgive me."
Rostopchin undoubtedly was responsible for the fire of Moscow, and he actually ordered a number of his junior officials to set fire in various places in the city. It is based on the idea that you will deprive the enemy of accommodation, comfort, and you will also persuade him that this is a war to the death.
The fires in Moscow were a catastrophe for Alexander I. Later on, he would say that it was a fundamental element. He said, "The fires in Moscow lit up my soul." It was a real trauma for him.
In abandoning Moscow, Alexander loses the support of the Russian people and starts to doubt his generals. Devastated, he confides in his favorite sister, the Grand Duchess Ekaterina Pavlovna.
Alexander. How could you allow the Corsican to take residence up in Moscow?
Kutuzov led me to believe that our armies triumphed in Borodino. He tricked me and...
You weren't responsible, brother.
I didn't want to listen to Kutuzov. I was just giving in to the general consensus.
They're accusing you of betraying the honor of the country and ruining the people. All the classes are united now in their condemnation of you.
I don't have the skills.
Stop doubting yourself.
I am badly advised, badly served, and facing an adversary who has the whole of Europe at his disposal.
Do you intend to abandon your empire to this scoundrel? That monster who wanted to marry me, to whom you almost promised my hand?
Don't worry. I will refuse any negotiation with him while there is a single French soldier present on imperial soil. And if my dynasty ever ceases to reign, I will grow a beard. I will go and eat potatoes in deepest Siberia, because I love potatoes.
Gradually, the Tsar ends up laying the blame on the French for the fires, in an attempt to reunite the population.
Mosковской губернии. Враг рода человеческого. Наказание Господне за наши грехи. Дьявольское воплощение. Француз, злодей, занял Москву и поверг ее в кровь и огонь.
The fires in Moscow were a new catalyst in terms of the resistance of the Russian people, because these invaders had taken over the historic capital of Mother Russia and set it on fire.
So long as Napoleon didn't succeed in doing that, Alexander would fight. And there was no reason for him to make peace just because Napoleon had got to Moscow. And he knew that the longer Napoleon stayed in Moscow, the more difficult the French position would become.
Torrential rain eventually quenches the fires. In the heart of this wasted city, Napoleon is cradling illusions that the Tsar will beg for mercy and ask for peace, and that it will only be a matter of days. There's no question of weakening. The arsonists are arrested in their hundreds and escorted to the scaffold. Convicts, middle-class bourgeoisie, Russian policemen, most of them plead innocence, but the order is given to kill with bayonets those who attempt to run away. Sergeant Bourgogne remembers. Until Moscow, I had always been a fairly carefree person who was above the problems burdening us. It seemed that the more danger and suffering there was, the more there needed to be glory and honor.
The majority of accounts and stories from soldiers who arrived in Moscow described scenes of pillage. After the fires, Napoleon left people to their own devices. He allowed the city to be pillaged, and his soldiers amassed a wide range of objects, including antiques, jewelry, and paintings.
There was meat to be found, vegetables and drink, and there were a lot of stories that showed that the soldiers who were able to break into the cellars of the Moscow bourgeoisie found plenty of alcohol there, emerging completely incapable of doing their jobs as soldiers.
Day 8 in Moscow, and no news of Alexander. Napoleon finds a way to contact him.
Sir, Captain Yakovlev.
Ah, Captain. I hear your family is one of the most respectable in the city. And that you tried to run away, but you didn't have time.
You are well informed.
In exchange for a laissez-passer for you, your mistress, and your child, would you please deliver this letter to your sovereign?
I cannot guarantee that he will agree to read it.
Do your best.
The Emperor hopes to push the Tsar into an honorable capitulation.
Alexander, my brother, I'm a peace-loving man. It's not with pleasure that I am camped here. I miss my wife and son, and I wish you no harm. But those who serve you are only seeking personal glory. I am convinced that if nobody comes between us, our former friendship will soon return, and all this unhappiness will be over.
He thinks I'm being influenced by my entourage. It is I and I alone who refuses to grant him peace. You didn't know that I gave an order to not embark under any circumstances on any negotiations with Bonaparte?
Your Majesty, I am but the messenger.
Take him to the Peter and Paul fortress, where he can await a verdict for treason.
I was forced to do it.
For Alexander I, signing a peace treaty would probably have been a suicide mission. He would have been removed from the throne and replaced, and Alexander I knew that very well. The Tsar was categorical. Not only did he not want to negotiate, but he didn't even want anyone to speak with the French emissaries on his behalf.
And above all, Napoleon considered that having taken the historic capital of Russia, he had won the war, and now it was just down to thrashing out a peace treaty.
While he waits for Alexander to capitulate, Napoleon manages French affairs from Moscow. He also organizes the daily lives of his soldiers to keep them busy and to lift their spirits. As such, he reopens the French theater in Moscow, but only for the troops stationed in the city. With Moscow having been largely destroyed by the fire, the majority of the soldiers have to camp out in the suburbs. Outside the city walls, they are much more exposed to the enemy and are attacked by partisans, helped by armed women and peasants determined to support their fathers and husbands and to avenge their brothers and sons.
In terms of the partisans, there's only one thing you can say. They were army brigades made up of Cossacks and Hussars. It was the biggest force that had ever fought the French.
The Cossacks came from the south of the country and formed communities of free men. They had preserved a certain autonomy and used unusual tactics inherited from the people of the steppes. They were used to harass the enemy, attack its flanks and rear guard, and to damage communication lines night and day. These tens of thousands of Cossacks inspired terror in their enemies and wore down their spirits like diabolical apparitions.
Alexander still refuses to answer. What ridiculous stubbornness. He will regret this. I'm sending you back to St. Petersburg, Caulaincourt. You will see the Emperor Alexander and you'll make peace. He knows you.
He will refuse to see me. He knows that time is on his side. Winter is coming.
Oh, stop with the winter. The fall is milder here than in Fontainebleau.
Don't count on it, sir. Winter will come, and in the state we're in, it will hit us like a bomb.
Continue.
We need to re-equip the army. We need sheepskins, gloves, hats, fur-lined boots, the things one needs for winter.
I'm listening.
Many of our men have already perished between the Niemen River and La Moskova, and believe me, we are lacking so much. We haven't prepared the winter horseshoes, so how will they manage with the artillery, with the diseased and wounded? The weather is still good. Let us profit from it and leave Moscow.
Leaving Moscow would be admitting defeat. I understand your scruples about meeting Alexander. While Russia is so devastated, if that's the case, go and see Kutuzov.
He will not give in either.
Then I'll send Lauriston, and he will have the honor of having made peace and having saved the crown of your friend, Alexander. You're dismissed, Caulaincourt.
There is no question of a Russian capitulation. In sending the Marquis of Lauriston to negotiate with General Kutuzov, Napoleon hopes above all to save face and save his troops. Like Caulaincourt before him, Lauriston had been the French ambassador in St. Petersburg.
The Emperor, my master, would have liked to have handled Moscow, like Vienna and Berlin. But in setting it ablaze, your compatriots have destroyed the work of several centuries.
Милые дамы, через несколько минут я полностью ваш.
We have never made war in this way. Our soldiers are not arsonists.
Unfortunately, the people are convinced of the contrary. For the Russians, this war is as devastating as a Tatar invasion.
You cannot compare Napoleon to Genghis Khan.
Oh, you're right. Genghis Khan was never so disrespectful as to turn our churches into stables.
Your peasants have demonstrated extreme cruelty towards their prisoners. They scald them and impale them alive. Their ferocity is contrary to the rules of war and...
Is our regular army also so dishonorable?
No, but...
Alas, I cannot control the serfs. They need to be completely re-educated.
Let us at least organize an exchange of prisoners. The Emperor sincerely desires to put an end to this quarrel between two such generous nations. Let us find a compromise.
A compromise? Do you want me to be damned by posterity?
This war cannot go on any longer. Let us try to conclude an armistice.
Oh, I am absolutely forbidden from speaking that word.
Three times Alexander refused to enter into negotiations, and it paid off. A battle-weary Napoleon was forced on the 19th of October to announce his withdrawal.
Napoleon is not a complete idiot. He can add up the realities of military logistics and he knows what will happen to him if he stays in Moscow over the winter and all his horses die, as they undoubtedly will. And he imagines, again not entirely realistically, what might happen in Paris if the emperor is cut off from his capital for 4 months at the other end of Europe.
In his last letter from the Kremlin, the emperor announces his retreat. This letter reveals a man overwhelmed. He had arrived in Moscow at the top of his power, but he is leaving in a weakened state. It is the start of an unstoppable decline. Nobody had ever seen him express himself with such emotion, even when he talked of his love for the Empress or his son. Moscow has floored him. The Grande Armée prepares to leave the city. Among us, there was a young and attractive person who, it was said, belonged to one of Moscow's first families. In a moment of madness, she had become involved with one of our superior officers. And in another bigger moment of madness, she followed him in the retreat. The fatal convoy. A ragtag caravan of all kinds of vehicles, stuffed with the most unlikely bounty. Whole bookcases of beautiful volumes, old masters rolled up for easier transportation. Despite the premonition of misery they bear, each is carrying their share of the spoils, along with several pounds of sugar, rice, biscuits, and liquor to head off the future deprivation. Behind the fighters come the non-combatants of the Grande Armée, ambulance drivers, engineers, blacksmiths, bakers, farriers, cooks, women and children, all of whom have also profited from their stay in Moscow. The presence of the non-combatants mingling with the rear guard will soon prove to be a terrible handicap.
Kutuzov's strategy is, in a way, simple. He believes that the climate will help to destroy the French army. He knows that his Cossacks, backed by regular light cavalry, will force the French army to stay on the roads, make it impossible for the French to forage, and therefore doom most of them to starvation.
And that was no doubt Kutuzov's masterstroke, obliging him to retrace his steps. And indeed, a few days after leaving Moscow, the soldiers were crossing the battlefields of Borodino that nobody had had the time to clean up.
The remains of the Battle of Borodino. We wondered what had been the point of this victory, writes Sergeant Bourgogne, this battle already celebrated by the number of victims whose lives it took. As far as the eye could see, there was an almighty stench with legs, arms, and heads poking out of the earth. The rain had left open graves. There is nothing more pitiful than all those dead who had barely kept their human form 52 days after the battle. Grande Armée Dr. Heinrich von Roos remembers, everywhere we camped or on the road, when the wounded needed to get down from their transport or to redo their bandages, they were abandoned by cruel cooks, arrogant women with their newly found riches, or merciless brothers in arms. I saw some of them moaning and begging for help on the road. Like Armand de Caulaincourt had sadly predicted, the winter arrives without warning in early November. Temperatures fall below -20 degrees Celsius. The horses have not been shod for ice, and as a result, every movement makes them slip, and they become exhausted. The loads in the wagons need to be lightened, forcing the Grande Armée to offload their booty. Moscow is already little more than a distant memory.
I think the Grande Armée was not prepared for the winter because Napoleon never expected to fight a winter campaign.
Studies have shown that a combination of 3 factors, exhaustion, stress, and cold, wreak havoc on a soldier's metabolism. So much so that if they receive the equivalent of 500 calories a day, their body can only absorb a fraction. The harassment tactics of the Russians, combined with the weather and rationing of supplies, therefore accelerates the onset of malnutrition, amplifies the famine, and multiplies the number of those dying of hunger.
From the start, he expected to defeat the Russian army within 2 months. That was the whole logic of his strategy. But he gets drawn into a longer campaign.
On the ground, the men are freezing. They're so hungry that they slit open the bellies of abandoned horses, collect their blood, and cook it for food. The Russians profit from this terrible situation to attack their prey. The Grande Armée falls apart, while in Paris the balance of power is shifting. On the night of the 23rd of October in Paris, General Mallet and a few of his men go to the prefecture, seize the Minister of Police, Savagery, and take him to La Force prison. Mallet and his accomplices then go to the High Command in Place Vendôme without encountering the slightest resistance. Mallet has spread a rumor that the Emperor has been killed at the gates of Moscow. He wants to set up a provisional government and put an end to the war. The Emperor's popularity in Paris is waning. When Napoleon hears of this attempt at a coup d'etat, he only has one thing in mind.
I must return to Paris now. I cannot allow emotions to spiral out of control, even if this business only lasted a few hours. There are always wise men to continue the work of fools.
You cannot return to France before your army.
They were ready to sound the death knell at Saint-Roch to announce my demise. And nobody even thought to designate Marie-Louise as regent. And I have a son, a successor. But they have forgotten him, Caulaincourt. They have forgotten the King of Rome.
While Napoleon thinks about returning home, the massacre continues on the ground. In mid-November, only 42,000 men remain of the 104,000 who left Moscow. The others have perished from hunger, exhaustion, and disease, or have deserted, some of the stragglers falling into the hands of Cossack detachments, and others dying in combat. Smolensk is no longer very far away.
Napoleon hoped to pass more to the south, on the richer lands that hadn't been touched, where they might find food. But he was prevented from doing this by the Russian army, which forced him to return the way he had come, via Smolensk.
They all hope to find food and fodder for the horses in Smolensk, thanks to the levies imposed on the local population. The survivors believe that the end of their hardships is close.
In Smolensk, Napoleon had given orders for provisions so the men would have something to eat when they arrived. But the troops he'd left there had already started on these reserves, which meant that there wasn't enough to fulfill the needs of the returning army.
It's a huge disappointment. Starving and weakened, the Grande Armée has to leave Smolensk. It's but a shadow of what it once was, and the Cossacks profit from this vulnerability to attack its flanks. This constant harassment forces Napoleon to keep his surviving troops on a route that has been stripped bare. As for Kutuzov, he has 80,000 men in pursuit and is getting dangerously close to Napoleon's position. He's supported in the north by General Wittgenstein, who has 40,000 troops and is preparing to bear down on the middle of the French army, while General Chichagov completes the Russian encircling of the French with 27,000 troops and 100 cannon upstream of the Berezina River. The noose is tightening, especially as Chichagov has taken a key position. He's controlling the only crossing point of the Berezina River, the bridge at Borisov. The Grande Armée is exhausted and its numbers are reducing a little more each day. The wind is like a razor blade, cutting to the marrow. The ice seals their eyelids and their fingers stick to the metal of their guns. It makes their legs as fragile as alabaster. The joints in their feet and hands break at the slightest pressure, yet they feel no pain. To remove the clothes of the fallen, one cannot wait until their bodies are frozen stiff. More than one finds himself stripped before breathing his last. Sergeant Bourgogne remembers. Exhausted by this inhuman march, I left the ranks and joined up with a few soldiers. I had one potato left to eat. In a fit of selfishness for which I never forgave myself, I didn't share it with my friends who were dying of hunger. But it was frozen solid. My teeth slid across it, unable to take a bite. I was taken by an overwhelming desire to sleep, but I knew that it would be fatal. I had to move, march, and stay awake, so I went back on my way. Bourgogne is disorientated by the blizzard and the darkness. The snow covers his footprints. He marches like this until dawn, looking for his regiment. He can no longer feel his limbs, nor the rats gnawing at him. At dawn, he discovers the remains of a convoy and the hope of finding something to eat. Something to keep him alive for a few more hours on this miserable earth.
Подожди. Не стреляй.
Sergeant Bourgogne remembers. One has to have felt the rage of hunger to understand. We would have eaten the devil had he been cooked.
Может быть, в плен возьму? Его хоть так кормят.
Hatred mingles with compassion. But the Russian soldiers are also deprived. A prisoner means one more mouth to feed. Choices have to be made.
As the troops progressed, they left behind the stragglers and the sick, who were immediately taken prisoner.
The prisoners' fates varied depending on their circumstances. Those who were lucky enough, if you can put it like that, to be handed over to the regular army were escorted east to stop them returning to fight. Others met an even worse fate. They had everything taken from them and were turned over to village communities, who often put them to death.
Alexander is shocked by these revelations and does everything he can to forbid such practices, promising a reward for soldiers and peasants who hand prisoners over to a civil authority to have them locked up. But the abuse of prisoners isn't just limited to the Russians. In Smolensk, 600 Russian prisoners considered unable to march are executed by the French. Alexander's getting impatient. He knows the end game is coming. The Berezina is his one chance, and he gives his men the order to capture Napoleon.
The Battle of the Berezina is a battle that made a real impact on Napoleon's campaign. The name refers to a river, which was an obstacle for Napoleon's army. And Kutuzov thought that the Berezina would be the obstacle that would enable him to surround Napoleon and seize his army. The army that came from Moscow approached the Berezina River and hoped to cross it at a place called Borisov, where there was a bridge.
Under orders from Napoleon, Marshal Oudinot boldly swoops upon the town of Borisov, capturing it without difficulty. But the Russians have burned the bridge, destroying the Grande Armée's only route over the Berezina and out of Kutuzov's pincer movement. They need another route, urgently. One of Marshal Oudinot's units lost on the other bank comes across a peasant soaked up to his armpits. They deduce there must be a place where the river can be forded nearby. They interrogate the peasant, who tells them that it is nearby the village of Studyanka, 8 miles north of Borisov. But Napoleon is not the only one to understand the strategic importance of the bridge at Borisov. Chichagov is defending the west bank with 30,000 men and 100 cannon. At the same time, Kutuzov is coming up behind the Napoleonic forces with his 80,000 troops. And he asks General Wittgenstein to complete the circle with a 30,000-strong force. But Napoleon predicts their charade.
Oudinot and Mouton, you will discreetly advance your troops towards Studyanka. When night falls, you will build 2 bridges there. One for the artillery and the wagons, and the other for the infantry and cavalry.
But, sir, if...
Wait, Lauriston. At the same time here, downstream from Borisov, visible to the enemy, we will rebuild the bridge there. But, contrary to what the Russians will think, we won't use it. And while Chichagov concentrates most of his troops here, our troops will cross the river here, in Studyanka.
The apparently helpless situation of the Grande Armée did nothing to disturb the Emperor's serenity. Everyone else was in a panic, writes Caulaincourt, but Napoleon was bigger than that. Hope intoxicated him more than the most terrible setback could drag him down.
Napoleon had the great idea of using a decoy, which in fact worked very well, because he ordered Borisov to be retaken by the French and ordered a lot of ostentatious construction in Borisov to make the Russians think he was going to cross there. But at night, secretly, in the dark, he ordered the transfer of his men to begin, in the wake of Eblé's bridge builders, who were in charge of the construction of the 2 famous bridges at Studyanka.